He landed earlier in the morning at 4 a.m. He's had a triple espresso to keep himself up for this talk that he's going to give. And he's walking around Shopify giving out money to people without asking for equity so that they can grow their Shopify apps. So next up is Alex from Epsi Fund.
Thank you, Adi. Cheers. Hi, guys. As Adi just introduced me, I'm Alex, and indeed, I landed only at 4 a.m. in the morning in Bangalore. So, yeah, forgive me for any mistakes I make, any stupid things I say here on the stage. I'll try and to be nice and clear, but we'll have a Q&A at the end as well, so you will have an opportunity to ask me embarrassing questions as well. Epsi Fund. I think actually Adi did a great introduction. So what we do, basically, we dish out money. We actually do ask a few questions when we do that, and we really kind of want you guys to succeed when you're building your apps or acquiring apps, operating Shopify apps. And we're very much kind of focused on Shopify ecosystem, where we try and help with funding, but not just with funding, but other things. And we do spend quite a bit of time thinking about important pieces that Shopify operators and Shopify developers, thinking themselves about when they're kind of trying to improve their journey, as well as the journey of the merchants. Now, let me see if the clicker is going to work. Yes, it works. So yeah, who's this guy? What is it all about? Yeah, that's me. I'm Alex. I come from sort of the background in finance. I spent quite a bit of time in banking. Also built my own e-commerce business about 12 years ago. So I've been in merchant shoes for quite a while. Actually operated quite a few platforms, and it wasn't Shopify to begin with, I must admit. But anyhow, at some point, came to the conclusion that working at the intersection of finance and e-commerce is something quite interesting. And then the SaaS business was another interesting piece, which I decided, along with my co-founders, to actually focus my energy and try and see whether we can help providing a very bespoke solution to help people grow their business. Yeah, that's just a few words about us as a team. We come from sort of entrepreneurship background, but we also have, experience in investment banking, e-com, as well as enterprise kind of software developments. We've got a kind of a fairly strong team of back-end developers, not so strong team of front-end developers yet, but we're kind of working on the improvement on this side. And we do actually have some investment track records. We have previously successfully done investments in private credit, in equity, angel rounds, and also kind of did debt and equity investments for SaaS and R&D businesses. Yeah, that's probably enough about us. Let's kind of come to the point where we probably need to kind of talk with you guys a bit more. So what do we know and why do we care? So in the very beginning, on one of the first slides, you might have seen that I'm here to talk about the pricing and the pricing models that could be adopted and should be adopted for Shopify applications. So as we've been sort of focusing on Shopify ecosystem in the last kind of 2.5, 3 years, and looking through a vast sort of amount of data, we worked with more than 200 Shopify apps so far, and we've kind of collected hundreds of thousands of data points. And as we kind of looked through the data, we kind of decided, why don't we actually try and find some interesting insights that could help us to see whether the business is succeeding or maybe not so much. And finally, we came to realize that, pricing is a very important lever that the Shopify app developer can actually pull in order to kind of gain success. Things like growth rate, retention, and margin, these are the ones that can definitely be influenced by the pricing model you are choosing. And we've seen that by kind of running, things like regression, cards model. So with a few, machine learning techniques, we clearly identified that there's a positive correlation between, your kind of sort of success in the pricing model and growth, retention, and margin. And what do you guys think those three metrics actually have in common? Growth, retention, and margin. What do they drive? Any idea? Profit. ARR. Valuation. Yeah, actually valuation is what I'm looking for, because ultimately, whether you're kind of looking to raise funding or just, increase the value of your business, which IRR is obviously part of, or you're kind of looking to potentially sell your business to someone, valuation is really key. And, these are kind of the three metrics that underpinning valuation. And again, we've kind of seen it in the data, corroborated it with, other Shopify ecosystem developers. And kind of for operators to know that indeed, those kind of things help. And indeed, our own Shopify app valuation model is actually built with those kind of three core metrics in mind. So that's why we think it is important to understand and choose the right pricing strategy for your app and or apps. Now, a couple of questions to you. So who considers themselves to be at the early kind of days of exploring Shopify ecosystem? If I can just maybe see a few hands, who's really early on in their journey with Shopify? Thanks, guys. And who's been within the Shopify ecosystem for quite a while and consider themselves to be quite experienced, like advanced guys? Right, sounds like we've got probably around, 50-50. The fun fact is, no matter whether you're kind of at the very, very start or you've been, doing that for quite a while, the question of pricing is really the one you're probably kind of looking at and, seeing it as a challenge, and rightly so. Because things don't stay static, macroeconomic environment changes, there are kind of different things being adopted by other B2B SaaS businesses, outside of Shopify. So it is definitely kind of worth looking and revising as to what's going on outside and what is it that we're doing with our own pricing models. Now, to begin with, we're obviously very used to one simple model, which is fixed, subscription-based, type of model. Judge Me is a great example. They've got $15 a month as the price, for their app, right? So no matter what, that's the one and only. Very simple. But things actually get quite complicated as we start sort of layering that with other things, such as freemium or kind of a tiered plan, or we actually start looking into potentially adding usage-based pricing. And there are many more other things that people are experimenting with and kind of trying to see whether they work, improve, their sort of revenue, their retention, or not. So if we were kind of to look at B2B SaaS space overall and what's going on right now, we can actually turn to a few research, papers that have been published recently, and we can easily find out that the situation is the following. Roughly 65% of B2B SaaS companies are actually using, again, plain vanilla subscription-based pricing still. About 35% of them are heavily utilizing usage-based pricing. And what we're seeing within Shopify ecosystem, and again, this is probably more anecdotally, we don't really kind of claim to have the big kind of data or any sort of, one and sort of unique knowledge, but it feels by the numbers we're seeing, more and more people are adopting usage-based pricing, right? Rather than just kind of relying on good old sort of a fixed type of payment model. Now, the interesting bit about usage-based pricing is the definition, right? What is it? It's essentially a model where customers are billed based on how much they use a provided service or a product, right? You use it so much, you pay for it accordingly. You don't use it as much as maybe I would want to as a Shopify developer, you don't pay for it. Now, apparently it's not a new thing, and somewhere someone said, actually goes back to the early days of the 20th century, where the company Michelin, the producer of the tires, actually used to bill their automobile manufacturers for the distance that tires would travel, which is effectively a usage-based pricing model. But more recently, some of the people have been saying, well, probably Salesforce was the one kind of introducing kind of various kinds of usage-based pricing within the B2B SaaS. Now, there are obvious benefits of utilizing usage-based pricing, as you might have guessed, or perhaps you're already kind of doing that and you are seeing it on kind of real examples of your business. But if we look from the merchant perspective, it is definitely transparency, right? And when I say transparency, sometimes we do come across interesting cases where it's not really fully transparent, But usage-based pricing is definitely meant to be transparent. When you say, okay, I'm going to charge you that amount per each order I'm going to synchronize, or each piece of stock of your inventory between Shopify and Amazon, or Shopify and Shopee, whatever kind of platform you want to synchronize with. So customer satisfaction is another important bit, where indeed you're kind of trying to be transparent, you're trying to be honest, you're saying, hey, look at my pricing, this is how much you're going to be paying if you're going to be using it within that sort of volume, right? And the cost predictability is also kind of a good point where you're being honest and upfront about stuff that is kind of yet to come. But on this one, I'd probably kind of treat it with a word of caution, because sometimes the cost predictability is actually not that straightforward for the merchants when they're kind of looking at usage-based pricing and seeing, not sure how much sort of, my order volume is going to grow next month, or, how many kind of more pieces of stock I'm going to add, depending on what's going to happen, with the sales I'm currently running. Infrastructure sizing and scaling is a really important one, and it's probably more important for us as a developer, right? When we're kind of trying to understand, yes, we definitely want our infrastructure, our architecture to be scalable, as Shashank was alluding to earlier, but we don't necessarily want to pay more than we should, right? So we want to make sure that it is proportionate to the volume of usage that our merchant's going to be ultimately using. But while we're talking about usage-based pricing, why we're even sort of, asking ourselves whether we should change something, why don't we go ahead and continue doing what we're doing, as in the 65% of the SaaS businesses are just kind of charging the flat, subscription-based fee? Well, there might be a potential problem, and that problem is a misalignment, right? Where the software value is not directly linked to the costs, and potentially risks us to have a higher customer churn, but actually more importantly, it also leaves revenue growth untapped. And when I say revenue growth untapped, I imagine a nice sports car with an old-fashioned sort of quite, bad kind of steering wheel. And that's just a blunt tool which wouldn't really allow you to have the precision at the high speed that the sports car can go at, right? So with subscription-based pricing, which is just flat, you're potentially missing on the upside of revenue, right? If the merchant's business is growing, you're not necessarily kind of capturing this growth. You're not necessarily kind of being part of this growth, even though that may potentially load your infrastructure, right? So, and it's not because you want to be greedy and take away, some of the stuff from the merchant. It's actually because you want to be transparent, and you're saying, okay, there is a transfer of value, and it's kind of a fair exchange of value, right? I spend more, I kind of increase the load, I need to think about my infrastructure in a different way, hence I charge you a bit more for that. And another point here is that the usage-based pricing allows us to be flexible and attract more diverse customers. And what I mean by that is the following. I'm just going to demonstrate that with the next slide, where we have an example. So the name of the developer has been changed at his request. It's an inventory sync app for Asia-Pacific marketplaces, and they've had a really interesting experience in this space, where initially they operated two-tier pricing models. They had a flat fee, and they also had usage-based elements in both, which was fine, allowed them to grow. And we're going to talk about advantages and disadvantages of those models a bit later. But the biggest game changer for them was when they introduced the free tier, and within that free tier, they also had usage-based pricing. So all of a sudden, they started capturing those kind of smaller merchants. And yes, we all know what it means. Some of them are going to close their store, so we're going to have this involuntary churn, which is not great. But actually, what those guys have noticed, that previously, they didn't capture this audience at all. So now they have access. And actually, some of those merchants are going to grow and become successful. And they're going to be very happy to move on to the next tier and on to the next tier, because they've been incentivized. As the usage-based model, on to the next tier is going to be more economical for them. So I think the guys really managed to implement a clever kind of a tiered model. But what I really want to emphasize is your kind of ability to capture the wider audience by introducing usage-based pricing and also kind of being smart about it. So yeah, perhaps let's spend a bit of time talking about the advantages of the usage-based pricing. I mean, the customer fairness is what we touched upon, right? We're kind of talking about, being honest, being transparent, and, obviously communication is an important bit here because we've seen some bad communication sometimes being done or absence of communication, so people do ask a question, well, it's actually unclear to me why, things are changing, why all of a sudden I'm being kind of charged something extra. But as long as you're open and honest and you're kind of transparent in your communication, the customers, i.e. merchants, going to appreciate that. Revenue growth. We just touched upon one of the examples, and we're also going to talk about sort of revenue potential when we sort of touching upon quick recovery in the difficult macroeconomic conditions. So the cost savings. The cost savings is a really interesting one because it's not just about scaling and sort of adjusting your infrastructure in the right way, but it's also about you having a better idea as to what is likely to happen. Because once you start implementing usage-based pricing, you're probably pushing yourself to start monitoring more metrics related to the volume of usage. And by doing that, you're bound to have a better idea as to what is going and is likely to happen in the future with your merchants. There's also an interesting example we've observed with one of our clients who actually managed to run a clever arbitrage at the margin level, where it's a medium-sized sort of abandoned cart recovery messaging app. And what they're doing is, well, first of all, they decided to kind of utilize a slightly unconventional approach, where instead of running serverless, they hired a dedicated server instance to keep the cost flat. Obviously, we all know what can happen when it comes to the kind of a larger scale. But at least at this point, they really kind of managed to extract quite a high margin because they also decided to go without any middle layer for the messaging service. So they directly implemented integration with the API of the messaging service without utilizing guys like Twilio or SendGrid. And that allowed them to have a better margin. And with this kind of a fixed cost, at least for the time being, they really kind of managed to extract quite a nice margin. And that is obviously all kind of purely based on usage-based pricing. Insights, that's what I just talked about when it comes to yourself kind of needing to know more about the metrics, needing to know more about predictability of the usage-based volumes. And the quick recovery is an interesting bit, especially right now, because you may have seen that venture capitalists have been lately pushing hard for their kind of backed VC, for their kind of backed SaaS companies to adopt usage-based pricing. And one of the reasons for that is because we all know with a high interest rate environment we're currently in, it's not as easy to do business as it used to be in the past when money was free. And as a result, we're also kind of seeing a sluggish demand. Having said that, I mean, it's not just static, things do improve. If we're looking into our kind of ecosystem of Shopify, even within the 12 months of the year, we all know that's going to be peaks and troughs, right? After the BFCM, come sort of end December, beginning of January, that's probably going to be a low, time for many of us. Then we also may see a bit of a downturn in August. So even those kind of things can actually help us to then capture the recovery quicker with the usage-based pricing rather than just kind of relying on a fixed, kind of a flat pricing model. So a piece of research, right, which has been conducted by Amaxio, the guys responsible for building of the B2B SaaS businesses. And again, this is not kind of directly linked to Shopify apps as such, but fundamentally, that's kind of the same model. And the interesting thing that they noticed that in the kind of harder macroeconomic environments, those kind of SaaS businesses that are utilizing consumption pricing or usage-based pricing, if you like, actually seeing a higher growth rate as opposed to those who are still kind of staying with the traditional model. And right now, the difference is about 5%, which is actually not insignificant. And there was another piece of research conducted with the public SaaS companies. Those guys are obviously way larger. But they also saw kind of a similar gap in terms of the growth rates. They haven't observed any other kind of considerably different metrics. Let's say retention doesn't actually seem to be that different. But again, it really depends on the combination of things that are being used by the company. But the growth rate is definitely kind of something which has been impacted quite significantly when it comes to this kind of transition from one to the other. Now, it's all good to be talking about the advantages, right? But maybe even before going into the slides, what do you guys think? What are the potential disadvantages of implementing usage-based pricing, especially if you're just doing the usage-based without kind of charging any flat fee? So what are your thoughts on that?
So the merchant cannot budget how much fee might cost, right?
Yeah, there is an unknown, right? Unless they know themselves and can predict their own kind of volumes quite precisely, they're probably going to be challenged on the predictability side of things. That's true.
So basically, merchants would look at what is the highest amount they can charge and be sort of pessimistic about it. Or they can charge up to $499, but I'm getting anything for free. So they would not, if you say that this is at $19, they will look at that $19. But if you say, okay, it starts from 0 to $499, they will look at that $499. Pessimistic nature about that, how they can charge up to that.
Yeah, interesting point being made with regards to the anchoring effect, which is probably more psychological. But yeah, to play it safe, the merchants may think, you know what, I'm probably going to budget the worst case scenario, which again is not necessarily going to be true. Any other kind of ideas?
I think it becomes unpredictable revenue for the partners because it depends on the usage. If the usage is less, then it's like essentially we are giving them an option to pause their subscription when they're not using it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the points on unpredictability for us as partners is quite important. And we can also link that to seasonality, because we all know merchants do have seasonality in their business. And it automatically means that we're going to suffer from their seasonality, as a result of kind of linking up with them in terms of the pricing. Go ahead.
In some cases, if it's linked to say seats, then it can also incentivize them to not upgrade and increase seats because the pricing is linked to number of seats. So in some sense, it's like they'll restrict it to as minimum as possible.
The good point with regards to, if you're doing it on a per seat basis, then again, they might kind of restrict themselves just knowing that they don't actually want to spend unnecessarily more than they should. I think we're not actually seeing that many of those kind of per seat models being utilized within Shopify specifically, but this is definitely a concern worth having in mind.
Valuation as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
Valuation, because the growth will be unpredictable in usage-based pricing. And when you go for the valuation, they will always see your growth, and it will be always like a credit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you may potentially actually impact quite a few things by purely utilizing usage-based model because it's going to be volatile, right? It may potentially become less predictable. And when an external observer is looking into that, he or she may think, oh, yeah, indeed, how do I value this? And we've been financing a couple of acquisitions of Shopify apps recently with the usage-based pricing models. And that's been a real challenge, not just for the guys acquiring, but also for us when it comes to evaluating and actually having a better idea as to what's going to happen to the revenue in the future. There are ways of doing that, so it's not completely impossible. So I wouldn't really kind of discourage people, because of that, but still, it's a valid point.
So here's my 2 cents on this one. So when you mentioned transparency, and in usage-based pricing, I don't think so there's going to be a lot of transparency with the shop owner. And similarly, as an application owner for myself, what I would have is unpredictability of my own revenue. I don't know what customer is going to pay the next month. So now I don't have any way to predict my own growth chart. Right?
Yeah.
In terms of revenue. So in usage-based, I find it unpredictable even for the shop owner as well as for the application.
Yeah.
Both ways, I am absolutely not in a transparent situation. Absolutely, an environment where he is not sure what he's going to be charged the next month. I don't know what he's going to pay, so I have no way to build my pipeline. I don't know what my revenue is going to be. So if I have a fixed model, and just the way I think someone mentioned that there has to be an anchor. That if the customer knows that there can be a $0 to $499 charge anywhere between that might work. A fixed model is is something that would give the shop owner as well as the application owner a very good way to have their own growth state.
Yeah, thanks very much for the points. For those of you guys at the back, so again, kind of talking about unpredictability and potential kind of lack of transparency when it comes to, again, the attempt to predict what's going to happen in the future. I mean, let's look at the stuff that I got here on the slides, and we just talked about unpredictability of revenue, the complicated monitoring and predicting, what's going to happen. That is indeed true. Financial management and reporting challenges, they can definitely come into the picture, given that kind of you implementing something new, and it's not as easy to predict and actually manage as the flat pricing. The increased exposure is an interesting one. So here we're talking about that, usage-based pricing models are more susceptible to quick kind of fluctuations during economic recessions. But as we said before, they're also the ones to quicker pick up the pace of recovery when it comes to recovery. Now, let's have a quick look at this graph. So here we picked up the apps that have decided to abandon the fixed pricing altogether, and they've gone with just usage-based pricing for those, I think, nearly 2 years. So some of them actually continue growing or remain flat, but all of them, as you can see, introduced quite a bit of volatility in their kind of revenue, right? If you're thinking of your own sort of MRR curve, and you're just utilizing the fixed pricing and your app has been growing, you're probably going to have seen this kind of a linear or maybe exponential growth, but not so much of a volatile line as here. Now, having said this, some of the people who've done it actually don't regret, because they might have been struggling with something else. Like in this post by Axel, with whom we had a discussion on this kind of particular point on Twitter, he decided to go with the usage-based model instead of the fixed price, because of the bandwidth costs that the stores would cause him when the sales would go up. So this is probably more about the pinch point, regarding the cost of your infrastructure. And if this is indeed the case, then you may potentially solve this problem. But on the flip side, you're going to have this kind of volatility introduced. Now, where's the happy medium? And I think, after having this discussion and the points you've just mentioned on disadvantages, it is becoming pretty clear that the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So by going from fixed to usage-based straight away, we're probably going to lose some predictability. We're probably going to lose some sort of, transparency in the communication with the clients. Whereas if we utilize both, so we have still a flat subscription fee, but on top of that, we add the usage-based pricing, and we are transparent about that in our communication with merchants, that's probably going to give us a much kind of a better, predictable, growth. It will be volatile, no doubt, because the usage-based will definitely kind of introduce this sort of a seasonality as well as volatility into your MRR, or revenue, if you like, at this stage, but it's definitely going to be better than not having kind of a stable base of a fixed price. And here we've got a couple of examples, again, sort of the apps that actually introduced usage-based pricing at a certain point of their lifetime. As you can see, both apps have been kind of growing pretty steadily, a bit of a kind of a linear growth. And then at the point of usage-based pricing being added, the volatility has begun. But actually, as they kept their subscription-based still in place, the growth has continued. And in the case of the Blue app, it has actually become nearly exponential. Whether it's because of the usage-based pricing or just kind of their right type of audience kind of being captured at this point in time, that is another question. But we come to the conclusion after having those kind of discussions with our clients and also kind of having a discussion with you guys right now, that's probably best to try and actually use the hybrid of the both, right? Going with just one may have serious implications for your business, may also have potential difficulties, whereas using the, both can actually probably give us a better chance of capturing extra revenue, riding this kind of wave of recovery after the difficult months, and yet still kind of having predictability in the business. I think that's pretty much it from me. Q&A time. So if you have any questions.
Attribution of that revenue or that
can give this one if you want. Should I give this one?
Yeah, so attribution is the main challenge when you are introducing a usage-based pricing. What I have realized very clearly and transparently, being able to capture and tell, and probably having a third-party verified system where you can say that, yeah, these revenues were really influenced by our app. And it is always going to be a combination of things. Any upsell app or related product app, when they are charging for usage, it's not all of their effort. It's also the marketing. The customer had come, and customer could have just bought, he was going to buy something, he just found another related item, probably found that better. And now you're saying that, okay, the attribution is mine. Is that really the case, and how to deal with that attribution and the transparency problem?
Yeah, great question about the attribution, right? When it's probably more applicable to those cases where we are kind of charging on a per usage based when we're claiming to drive extra sales. Let's say we're doing cross-sell or upsell, and we're saying for each kind of point of upsell or for each product, going into the upsell, we're going to charge X amount of money. Indeed, that's a tough one. And we did actually have a discussion with some merchants being present in the room. And what they said, we actually don't mind sharing our kind of revenue growth story with you guys as long as it's transparent and as long as it's predictable in terms of what's going to happen next. And they also said something about the buckets. So rather than just telling us, okay, this is the usage-based, which is going to go infinite up, we would prefer to have certain kind of brackets. And if you tell us, okay, within this bracket, this is the usage pricing, you then jump onto the next level of your growth. That's going to be another one. And obviously, as you grow and the volume increases, the merchant would expect some sort of a rebate. So as long as you're being honest, transparent, and fair with them in terms of this kind of journey, I think they're probably going to accept that. But don't forget there are also kind of other instances where kind of you're charging, for instance, per query to ChatGPT, or you're kind of per order being synced, or per sort of piece of stock being synced. In those cases, there's probably nothing to prove, nothing kind of to attribute to. It's pretty kind of clear, right? Wow. So yeah, that's probably what I would do, what I would use, and what sort of I know. Any other questions?
Yeah. Suppose, like, say, for example, new app is there. There is two tiers. One is the free plan and one is maybe $10 plan or something like that. After 6 months, he decides to introduce a volume tier pricing on the free plan. So then for the new merchants who sign up, it is very clear he will be charged on it. But what happens to the old merchants who have signed up 6 months ago? Do you prefer that they move into the new pricing, or it will be in the old pricing? Like, say, for example, 15th April, the new tiered pricing is launched. 14th April, there may be someone who might have signed up for a free plan. It doesn't look good after a day you are informing that, okay, no, there is no free plan, there is free plus volume.
Yeah, good point. I think, obviously you can grandfather those that have been on this kind of historic plan and keep them either on a free plan if you like, or you can potentially kind of keep them on a flat $10, $15 per month. But I think what I meant when talking about the kind of capturing the wider sort of audience, when you kind of introduce this usage-based or volume-based into the free tier, you're actually allowing some kind of early stage merchants to see, well, I don't really want to commit myself to be paying $20 per month. I don't even know what I'm going to be using that much of the service. But if I'm going to just be paying for the usage, that seems to be fair. I can probably deal with it. I know my volume is going to be quite low in the beginning, so I'm happy to pay a bit. But if it's going to grow, then I would know for certain, okay, it's growing, I'm getting more money out of it, so let me move to the next tier. So I don't think there's going to be necessarily kind of a massive problem in their minds with moving, up the chain within the tiers. But the grandfathering is an important, one, and it also depends on your kind of communication with your sort of merchants and, your knowledge of, what they want, how they kind of use the app, and what's kind of likely to happen. So I think on a few occasions we've seen people doing the interviews, And the App Store research is a great tool for that matter. So it's not just kind of being used by those guys exploring what to build and how to build it, but also if you're kind of looking to introduce certain changes, I mean, do try and maybe run a pilot. And we've seen some people doing that quite successfully, really kind of picking the kind of a target group of their merchants and running this kind of a pilot with them, and then just getting feedback, and on the basis of this feedback, actually knowing what to do next, whether kind of to introduce, to grandfather, or not. So yeah, that's probably the advice I would give from what we've seen in the ecosystem.
Hi, this is Varun. In some of these usage-based pricing models, there's obviously an 80-20 rule or a 90-10 rule, right? That means some applications that install it don't have much usage, and then you have some apps that do really well because obviously the website is doing extremely well. So, doesn't that have you seen any research on what would be the subscription fee or the amount that they're willing to pay before they feel like they can build versus, say, buy this app in this case? So $1,000, $2,000, like, is there a ceiling on how much a merchant is willing to pay when it gets to, a certain price point?
Yeah, that's a good question. Difficult to answer, to be honest. There's probably, some sort of a ceiling, and we talked about the anchors, right? So they're probably kind of thinking in their heads, well, I really kind of want to factor the worst case scenario, hence, this is probably how much I'm going to pay for it. And if you continue kind of going up and you're not kind of providing any rebate for that sort of a growth trajectory, it may feel a bit unfair. And we've kind of heard from merchants saying, yeah, we probably don't really want this kind of infinite, revenue share as such. Yeah, we do get it. We want to share. We understand if you're helping us to drive our business up, we can be honest and fair with you. But we clearly don't really want to be sharing more and more, or probably the same percentage as we're kind of growing further. The other point here is quite interesting. We have seen a couple of bad actors, right? So people would introduce usage-based pricing, but effectively it would be a rip-off, right? What they do, and I hope there's none of us here in this room doing that, but we've seen people just sort of checking in some really non-transparent sort of usage-based pricing into the mix. And what people realize as in merchants, that they've just been robbed, right? Like all of a sudden, there's a massive bill of $2,500 per month. And they're like, why? Why am I paying this? And then they're looking at the conditions, and actually somewhere in a small print, it does say that's, yeah, I mean, this is it. If your volume goes up, then that's how much you're going to pay. But that goes back to the point of communication, right? So don't assume that's what you're kind of thinking of and what you are expecting to be charging them is going to be entirely clear. Do make sure that communication is transparent and it's definitely being perceived in the right way by the merchant. I think that is a really important point here. Not to kind of surprise them with a massive bill at the month end.
Cool, we'll just take 2 more questions, okay?
Hi, my name is Arun Agustin. I'm co-founder of Corner Cart, an in-cart upsell app. So my question was, just like usage-based pricing, another leverage is annual billing so that you get that cash flow upfront. So this is typically an advice that's being given to SaaS companies that if you have annual pricing, that is discounted, but still you get that cash flow upfront, and that is very useful to scale up marketing. So with usage-based pricing, that becomes a confusion, right? So how do we handle annual pricing and usage-based pricing in that context?
Yeah, good point. And again, we've kind of seen some models where Shopify apps are actually utilizing monthly bill, also annual billing, and usage based on a monthly basis. So that's what we've seen. I'm not saying it's the right way to do that. Obviously, billing, a year in advance gives you kind of a lot of credit, a lot of sort of comfort with regards to the cash flow. So it's a very kind of convenient position for you to be in. For the merchants, it's obviously a bit of an outflow. I think the perennial question that the B2B SaaS guys and the investors are now grappling with is, what if you charge on an annual basis? It tends to be a larger check, right? And if we're talking about some bigger amounts, like maybe bigger apps, within the Shopify ecosystem, would that create some tension and some potential friction within the merchant's business where they may say, paying that amount, not sure about that. Whereas on a monthly basis, it would have been a smaller amount, right? Just, visually. And they could have just paid it, right, without actually asking too many questions, without necessarily kind of creating too much of a drama internally, because also it depends on the layers of organization that actually do play a role influencing decision-making when it comes to the purchasing, right, within the merchants business. Because, if there's likely to be a bit more scrutiny when it comes to the larger, obviously, purchases, and the annual bill will be kind of naturally higher for that reason. So yeah, but your question, probably kind of usage-based is something still kind of worth doing on a monthly basis, right? Simply because, again, you don't really want to create this kind of a massive surprise at the year ends, and I don't think we've actually seen that many examples of usage-based being charged on an annual basis. But yeah, you're right. Annual obviously gives you, quite a few advantages in that sense. Whether it causes any massive improvements in retention compared to the monthly billing, we've seen some research published by SaaS Capital, which says no, not really. No, your retention rates actually don't seem to go much higher, whether you're using monthly or annual. You're obviously in a slightly kind of more comfortable position cash flow-wise. What they're also seeing from the research is that more mature SaaS businesses tend to utilize annual plans way more than the early stage guys. But that's more of an observation. Again, the causality arm here is not that sort of easy to define. I guess the last question, right?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, my name is Suprita. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, can see you now. Sorry, it's just the
Yeah,
blinding
so
lights.
along with the action-based pricing, right, I think of late we see another trend, which is ROI-based pricing model, right? So as you've worked with so many other apps, so is the ROI-based pricing the new trend, and action-based is like the outdated? And I know definitely for app developers, it's going to be challenging. As someone mentioned, there's a lot of challenge in attribution, and no app developer actually can completely own that. So how do you see that trend picking up over action-based pricing?
Thank you. So I think the question is with regards to the return on investments.
ROI-based pricing.
Yeah. I must admit, we haven't seen that many implementations of that yet. So we do see people are providing visibility of that to their merchants. They're saying, hey, this is how much I helped you to increase your ROI. They may still charge the usage-based pricing, but it would be kind of based on something else. They would just simply say, okay, this volume of additional revenue generated with the help of my app is how much I'm going to actually charge you for that. We haven't seen them saying, okay, this is the ROI, hence pay me a portion of it, or pay me this or pay me that, depending on whether it's increasing or reducing. So I don't think we've got enough knowledge and expertise yet on this kind of particular points. And what we've seen so far is just more on the communication side of things, where people are kind of trying to probably just create this sort of a mental kind of linkage between this is the impact I'm making, it could be measured within the ROI, but we haven't really seen that kind of then going into the actual pricing model. I don't know, maybe someone is, John. Yeah, I think that's it. Sorry, it can be more helpful than that.
Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
You said that you were in a room with merchants and they expressed some concern. I think one thing that comes up, and anecdotally, is that merchants are overwhelmed with apps and pricing, and this type of complexity in pricing sort of outsources that thinking to them. So have you heard anything from merchants from that perspective? Because it's easy to just not miss the point that they could have 5, 10, 15 apps that they need to track pricing for. Do you have any more insight from the merchant's perspective?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Again, that kind of sort of room I was referring to, we've been into a couple of months ago. Again, it's more of an anecdotal kind of evidence, but they did mention that they just want better predictability and a better kind of visibility into what's likely going to happen in the future. And if they're growing really fast, they want to see some sort of discounts to kind of what they're being charged. I mean, with regards to the complexity, and we've also kind of heard from some of the merchants this kind of a notion. In general, we hate apps. We don't think apps should even exist because we just want functionality as is, by default. No apps, no plugins, right? That's the kind of ideal world. In I guess if you're looking from the merchant's eyes, just make it all ideal to me, right? Give me what I want. I don't want to actually deal with any apps, plugins, the complexity of the world at all. That's true because all they want to do is their business. And dealing with the apps obviously adds this complexity. And then dealing with the different pricing models of the apps adds more complexity. So if you speak to somebody like PJ from Judge Me, he's just going to advocate for the pricing model they're using. And there are actually quite a few people who would say, you know what, we don't think it's actually worth the hassle. The growth trajectory of our business is good enough. We're more than happy with it. We don't really need to introduce those kind of additional bells and whistles that's maybe going to bring some extra revenue, but actually may also create some friction on the merchant side, and as a result would, increase the churn. That is a valid point. Is that it? Right. Thanks very much, guys. It was a pleasure.